Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. Dear Family will explore many angles of mental illness, including isolation, drug addiction, and even suicide. Sounds like fun, huh? Well, you'd be surprised, actually, because once we get so invested with Rachel's guests, we can actually relate to many of the issues that naturally arise during her conversations, and what often follows is a knowing laughter. So yes, expect tears of heartfelt empathy, but don't be surprised if you chuckle now and then. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
My guest today is Adam Kallen, who just happens to be my awesome brother, the perfect guest for a podcast about family and mental wellness. Adam was the handsome captain of the football team, varsity baseball star, and scholar athlete who had all the girls calling and all the boys wanting to befriend him. He was also a hyperactive and impulsive child who got suspended for fighting, his ADHD going undiagnosed. Adam's self-medication led him down a dark path of crystal meth addiction and homelessness. I'm so happy to tell you Adam has been sober for 13 years now and has never been happier or more mentally healthy. Today, he hosts the most popular all-men's AA meeting in Brooklyn at Jane Motorcycles, the super cool hybrid clothing brand, coffee and motorcycle shop. Adam took his street-smart intelligence and tapped into his gifts by using his creative talents in marketing, fashion, design, and networking to build a successful business and loyal community. My brother is my inspiration and still the life of the party. Whereas he once was shady, like addicts tend to become when they lie or steal at all costs to get their drugs, he is now one of the biggest mensches I know. For those of you who don't speak Yiddish, a mensch is a person of great integrity and honor. I'm pleased to welcome Adam Kallen. Hi, Dimsk.
Hi.
That's my nickname for my brother. It morphed from Adimski. I'm so happy to have you on my first podcast. Thank you so much for being my guest. I want to know a little bit about you. Well, actually, I know a lot about you, but can you tell our listeners a little bit about you and what you're excited about?
Well, first of all, I am honored to be on your podcast. It's really exciting, and I'm so excited to see where this goes. And I know that you're going to be helping so many people with this, so that's great. A little bit about me. I live in New York. I was obviously raised in Los Angeles. I am 13 years sober, recovering drug addict and alcoholic. I have a business called Jane Motorcycles, which is a men's clothing brand. And we build custom motorcycles, and we have a cafe. It's in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And I'm engaged to the love of my life, JC Gossett.
Hi, JC, if you're listening. So this is a podcast about families. So let me start by asking you if you think your family, which in turn is my family, is complicated.
Yes, our family is complicated. Look, I think everybody's family is complicated. I don't think there's anybody that has one of those just picture perfect families. I think that's
completely agree.
But our family is, I like to say, very colorful. You grow up in a family, that's all you know. You don't know what it's like in other people's families. So like all I know is what was happening in our family. And there was a lot of colorful lack of discipline, just a lot of inappropriateness, a lot of communication that wasn't good communication. So yeah, there was definitely a lot going on there.
Yes. And I think some of that had to do with our mom's undiagnosed bipolar that resulted in mania and kind of inappropriate behaviors that we kind of modeled without realizing. That leads me to the next question. Did you ever feel any shame or embarrassment from your family?
Short answer is yes. For me, I don't know why, but from the beginning, my earliest memories, all I ever wanted to do was make sure that people thought that I was doing well. That all I really cared about was what you thought about me and not so much about like what I was going through. But it was an early form of people pleasing. I don't know where it came from, but I was more important with you guys thinking that I had it all figured out. Even if my heart was broken and it was crushed and you would say, hey, Adam, how are you doing? I would say, oh, I'm great. I'm great. Everything is good.
It was your own shame that you were kind of hiding.
Yes, for sure. I was hiding my own shame, but I think it was because from the inside, our family was complicated, like we talked about earlier. And then I started looking out to my friends' families. I always kind of liked what was going on with them. I would sleep over their house, quote unquote. They had like the picture perfect family. They went on vacations. They did all the things. They had the bagels and cream cheese on Sunday mornings. They did stuff. They had all the things. We didn't. In my mind, we didn't. I'm not saying that we were, totally down and out, but in my mind, I wish I could have transported myself into one of my friends' families. So I had a lot of shame about that internally, as well as I was kind of embarrassed about some of the things that happened, especially in my teens as a result of mom acting some inappropriate behavior and dad just not like being a very present father. So yeah, there was definitely some shame in that.
And I'm sure now that you are older and wiser, you probably realize that those families that you thought were quote unquote picture perfect and had everything together likely had their own family secrets and were hiding their own shame from whatever the form of mental illness was.
100%. Absolutely. And look, especially growing up in a town like Los Angeles, which everything is flashy, it's very superficial in a lot of ways. You don't know. You're comparing yourselves to other people. And so a lot of these families didn't have it together, but from what I thought, they did.
Well, yeah. And especially when you're a teenager, you're kind of egocentric and you think that it's about actual material things. As you get older, you realize it's so much deeper.
Yeah. And, when our parents got divorced, we went from living in a comfortable middle class neighborhood to, a not so comfortable, not as safe environment. That had a big impact on me. And I'm sure it had a big impact on you as well. And what was even a bigger impact is I kept all of my friends and just transported myself into a different socioeconomic environment. And so I had all the rich friends that had all the things, like I said, like the toys, the vacations, the stuff. And I didn't have any of that, or I definitely didn't have anything close to that. I was trying to keep up with the Joneses, and that became a long history of me lying and stealing and cheating in a way that just took me down a dark path. Like, here's a perfect example is I would go to my friends' houses and I'd sleep over and I might borrow a t-shirt or something, an article of clothing, fully knowing that I was never going to return it, like basically stealing from them. It's the thing that like, I just kind of snowballed into me, like losing a lot of integrity and just always trying to like make sure that people thought I was doing well by my outside appearances.
So that may be one of the reasons that you kind of turned to self-medication. And I want to talk about that in a second. I also want to talk about your thoughts on ADHD, because you were always a very kind of hyperactive, impulsive kid. Although, it never bothered me. I think that it kind of went undiagnosed. I'm wondering if you can just speak a little bit about that. And back then, we're talking, you grew up in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't really diagnosed like it is now, maybe a little bit too overdiagnosed. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are on your ADHD.
Like you said, and I've never been officially diagnosed with ADHD, but the symptoms of ADHD are fidgeting, there's a hyperactivity, there's lack of restraint, difficulty focusing, very short attention span, boredom. And if I'm being honest, I fall like directly into all of those symptoms. As a child, I still fidget. Reading was always difficult for me. Focusing was difficult for me. I had a very short attention span. I would get bored very quickly. So yeah, if I had to diagnose myself, I would say I definitely was ADHD. I never was taking medications for it. We can talk about this a bit further, but when I first dabbled into the world of crystal meth, it relieved me of all of those symptoms. It actually helped me focus. It helped me have more restraint. I was able to be funny. I was able to be smart. I was able to be the life of the party and creative and do all of the things that I was struggling with for so long, even prior to that in my alcoholism and drug addiction, that I found in my mind the perfect medication. And I told myself that I would never be without it because it was what I needed to be successful.
You know, it's so interesting because, by the way, you always were funny and smart and the life of the party. It just was your own perception. But, you know, Ritalin, which is what kids are given for ADHD, is a form of speed. So that is really fascinating. Can you tell us, imagine a parent is listening to this or a loved one is concerned about a brother or sister or any friend. Just tell us a little bit about your entrance into drugs, because oftentimes it's a slow process that, as you said, snowballs.
Yeah. I've been to a lot of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I've been to a lot of AA meetings, and I've spoken with a lot of people that struggle with addiction and alcoholism. And everybody's story is different.
Right.
Everybody's entrance into drugs are different. So like, I can only tell you my experience. There's a lot of similarities to my experience that other people identify with. Some people might be shocked to hear this, but like, I smoked pot in fourth grade. Our stepdad, Larry, was smoking weed and he gave me a hit of a joint. That's pretty early to be doing drugs.
Yeah.
And, you know, thank God I didn't have access to it, but I probably would have kept doing it, you know? And I was a good kid. Like, I was a straight A student. I really strived to do well academically and athletically. Thank God at fourth grade, I know stories of people that really go off the deep end that early in their life, but I was focusing on school and still doing well. And so my drugs and alcoholism didn't really get bad until I, went to college. For me, college was, unsupervised, went to UC Santa Barbara, an amazing place to go to school. So beautiful. And, it's also known as a party school. So I really had the freedom to hone my alcoholism and drug addiction. And it started with drinking, obviously, and smoking pot. And one thing I told myself I would never do was cocaine. And then I kind of created an invisible line that I drew in the sand, and I stepped over that and I did cocaine and I loved it. And I was in Las Vegas with all my friends and it was an amazing experience. And I told myself, this is awesome. This is great. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I never had a real good experience with it ever since then. I was always chasing that feeling. I hated it. I ended up hating doing the drug. I hated doing cocaine, but I couldn't stop doing it. You know how I was saying crystal meth made me feel funny and smart. On cocaine, I was really self-conscious. I was very self-aware and I was nervous and I was paranoid and I acted very strange on coke. I couldn't make a complete sentence sometimes. My jaws would kind of grind back and forth. My nose would run or it'd be stuffed up. And I always thought people were looking at me weird and I became a loner. I would get it and I ended up like feeling weird and go home and be by myself and do it all, alone till the early hours of the morning. And I would swear it off every time. I'd say, I'm not going to do this. This is horrible. I hate this. And I would swear it off. And, almost the next day I would be doing it again. I hated it. I had no control over it.
Your family didn't know. Your friends probably that weren't doing cocaine with you didn't know. And your fraternity brothers didn't know. And you were able to kind of keep it under wraps in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, my friends didn't know. My family didn't know. My fraternity brothers definitely knew because I was doing it. I was really good at hiding it from the people that I wanted to hide it from.
Right. Which is, when you're a real addict, you become good at lying just to get what you want, right? Well, then tell us about how you got into crystal meth.
Yeah. So after college, graduated, I went to law school. I was in this library one day and with my friend Joe, we were studying and he asked me if I wanted to do some crystal to help study. And I was like, yeah, okay, sure. I did it. And it was one of this kind of like white light, open eye experiences for me with, the heavens opened up and everything kind of made sense and I was able to focus. It gave me the ability to get stuff done that, I wasn't able to do, on a natural high. So I was into it from the get-go. I loved it. And I used it as a tool. It wasn't like a recreational thing. For me, it was a tool. I mean, law school was not in the cards for me. I didn't really enjoy my experience with law school, and I'm not a lawyer, but I did graduate.
Which is amazing that you graduated while doing crystal meth.
Yeah, I barely had a sober breath in law school. I was partying a lot. I was still kind of in party mode. I found my crew in law school that had the same ideas, and we were the guys that, we studied and we did our thing, but we didn't take it as serious as we should have.
I feel like that's what some of the kids are doing these days with, what is the drug, Adderall?
Yeah.
To study? Yeah. But I mean, your heart wasn't in law school, so that's a whole other podcast. Okay, so tell us what happened. Like, how did it just get kind of spiral out of control?
Sure. So I graduated law school, like I said, barely. I decided to not pursue a career in law. I ended up working for a talent agency in Beverly Hills, working with directors and writers and actors. And I was still doing drugs the whole time, but that was kind of a fun thing for me. But I wasn't fully creatively fulfilling me. And I ended up starting a clothing line. And I actually never really thought I would do, but I always had a creative spark in me. So I started a clothing line. And unfortunate thing for me with how this all ties in together is I started a clothing line. It was called Material Junkie. It was a men's and women's kind of sportwear, streetwear line. And at the moment I started the line, I transitioned from, sorry to scare your audience, but I transitioned from like snorting crystal meth to smoking crystal meth out of a glass pipe. Immediately when that happened, I actually had, coincidentally, amazing success with my clothing brand. So I associated in my head that as long as I smoke crystal meth, I'm going to have a very successful career. I couldn't disassociate the two of them. And I told myself, okay, so this is how it's going to go. I'm going to be a successful designer. I'm going to smoke crystal meth. And that's the key to success. And it worked for maybe a year. Like I was able to actually have some decent success. I was writing orders. I was in, places like New York and Japan and all the places I wanted to be in until it actually stopped working. I went from wanting to do business to only wanting to get high. And I went from really caring about, design and production to just where I would get my next high.
So much of your energy was spent on getting the next high and finding the drugs, correct?
Yeah. And look, you become kind of, I wasn't sleeping. I was staying up all night. You get into a state of deliriousness and your brain isn't working correctly and you just kind of become a mess.
Well, so, I have to tell you, because of course I was living through this with you. I remember thinking like, I'm so happy he's found his passion and he's just becoming this creative artist. But you had like dark bags under your eyes and your hair would be not washed and you pierced your nose and painted your nails black and would dye your hair different colors. I could never get a hold of you or your phone would be disconnected. And so mom, dad, and I, and my husband, Todd, we all were trying to figure out like, is this just part of his creative process? But, in the back of my mind and my intuition, I knew something wasn't right. And I was really worried about you.
There's nothing wrong with dyeing your hair and painting your nails.
No, of course not. But yeah, of course not.
At that point in my life, God, I was maybe in my late 20s, early 30s. I had went from having a house with roommates in Hollywood to moving back into dad's guest house above the garage, to him recognizing that I was a mess and dad kicked me out of the house, to me basically having nowhere to go, not having any money and living out of my car and still thinking that I was like killing the game. Like I thought that I had this amazing story and I was this artist and everybody's going to, hear about, the success I had and all the struggles. And it was kind of my story that I was telling myself. But in fact, I was homeless. I was a drug addict. I owed a lot of people money. I had lost all integrity. I had no money. When I started, having the purple mohawk, I smelled like gasoline because I was literally like siphoning gas out of people's cars. I was a mess. And I still thought that I was killing the game because I thought I was an artist and this is what an artist does. Wow. So
It's crazy because it brings back a very strong, sad memory for me. And that was when you showed up on my doorstep and you were so sick, you had a fever. And I had just had my second daughter, Molly. She was like a brand new baby, like weeks old. And I knew you were living in your car. And you asked if you could come in and sleep at the house. And I had to turn you away. One, because it's deathly for a newborn to catch an illness. And two, because you were such a mess. And sometimes I look back at that and I'm like, should I have let you come in? And it still eats at me because I knew you kind of had to hit rock bottom to ask for help, because we had at that point tried to get you help and you refused it. But there are so many stories of people, not surviving, and that you really actually should always be there when somebody's asking for help. It still sits with me, but I'm
you know, like, I don't want you to worry about that. You did the right thing.
Yeah, but it was like I closed the door and I dropped to the floor and just cried because you were my beautiful little brother that I had just turned away. It was the hardest thing I've ever done.
I'm really sorry that I put you in that position.
Well, I mean, I'm so beyond grateful that you ended up reaching out for help. So that's a great segue. Can you tell us about asking for help and going into rehab?
Sure. So like I said, I was living in my car and my car was getting repossessed. Basically, my house was in foreclosure.
So while you were in your car, they came to repossess it, or?
No, but I knew I was getting letters and I knew they were if they found me, they would have repossessed it.
Where did you get your letters if you're living in your car?
At that point, I had like a PO box and I was getting letters sent to me. Yeah. There was a lot of things that led up to me asking for help, but it was like, if I'm being honest, like that was one of the main things, is I had nowhere else to go.
Right.
Two, you actually sent me a text saying that you felt really sad that like I don't have a relationship with your daughters, and that really hit home. And three, one of those things that I just was done.
Right.
I was done with the hustle and just like surviving. I asked for help. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to ask for help. Or actually, I didn't even ask for help. I admitted I had a problem. I told you and mom really jumped on that opportunity to get me into a rehab. Within a day or two, I think I was meeting with people at Beit Teshuvah, a Jewish rehab in Culver City. And,
which is like a 12-step program, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a 12-step program, but it's also based on Judaism as well.
Right.
And that place saved my life. I went there thinking that I just wanted time to go for like maybe 30 days, basically get a vacation, like just get the heat off of me, get some place to stay, 3 meals, and just kind of take a vacation. And I did not go there thinking that I was going to be sober, or I was going to work the 12 steps of AA, or I was going to really give recovery a chance. That's not what I wanted at all. In fact, I had thought that was for people that were weak. I thought that if you were in AA, you had a weakness that gave in. And it was this whole story I told myself. In fact, I'd been to 1 or 2 AA meetings prior to going to rehab. And I was just like, yeah, I'm living in my car. I'm homeless. I have nothing. I have no money. I have warrants out for me. I have nothing. And I'm like, well, if it gets bad, maybe I'll go to AA. I mean, that's how silly I am. So, but I ended up going, and, they take you to meetings. In LA is an amazing place to get sober. There's huge meetings and there's great recovery in Los Angeles. And so part of the program is they load up in a bus and they take you to a meeting. And I would see people that I knew from LA that I had no idea were sober, that were super successful, that had like an amazing light in their eyes. And I didn't know that they were sober. And I was like, wow, this person's in recovery. This person's in AA. Oh my God, that person's sober. I had no idea. And I mean, I couldn't tell you what I heard in my first AA meeting. I couldn't tell you what I heard in my first 5 AA meetings. But what I do remember vividly is laughter, and people like real belly aching laughter. And I hadn't laughed in 10 years.
Wow.
And I was able to actually laugh because in AA, you tell a lot of these stories that are kind of like, the average person, the normal person might like be horrified by. but the alcoholic or addict relates to it and it's funny. We laugh at it. We laugh at ourselves. And I was able to laugh. And by the grace of God, I haven't had a drink or drug since then.
Incredible. One of the things that struck me is that the rehab immediately started putting you to work. Like you had to clean up after the Shabbat service. You had to volunteer your time in a secondhand store. You had to be of service to others. And it took someone like you who kind of had no integrity at that point and made you realize the gift of helping others, which I think was so powerful. And now you are that person that is giving others inspiration. Can you tell us a little bit about your AA meeting that you now host at Jane?
Alex is my business partner. We, from the beginning of our business, we always wanted to start an AA. And it was kind of born out of me going to AA meetings in LA, and some of my friends had stores and we would have these small intimate meetings at stores. And it was just kind of cool. And I liked it. And I was like, if I ever opened anything up for myself, I would love to do that. I ended up opening up this shop. Our first store was a really tiny store and it had a basement. And we started this AA meeting with 4 to 5 guys in the basement, sitting and just kind of going through the book and sharing and talking about it. And these were all guys that had been sober for a while, except for 1 or 2 guys who were just brand new to the program. This meeting has blossomed into this huge AA meeting. It's a men's group. It's on Wednesdays at 7:30 at Jane Motorcycles. It's called Jane's Addiction.
Oh my God, I love it.
And it's one of the proudest things I've ever done to see these people, these men walk in maybe with just 1 day sober or 1 hour sober, trying to save their life and looking for help in a place where most AA meetings are in church basements or in auditoriums. And look, I got sober in those places and I love it. And those places are awesome. But I feel our AA meeting's a little different. It's a little bit more aspirational. It's like there's motorcycles, there's coffee, there's clothing. It's in a really cool spot. And people, like, their eyes kind of light up when they go in there and they see that, there's a life out there that they can achieve if they want. But the main thing is that we help each other and that we put our arms around each other and we support each other. It's just turned into this incredible community of men that want to help each other and save their lives at the same time. It's a lot of creative people, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of restaurateurs, architects, actors, anybody.
So proud of you, Adam, really. I mean, I could cry just thinking about it. I'm just so grateful that you took that step to ask for help and look at where you are now. Okay, this is one of the last questions I'm going to ask you. So if you could write your younger 20-year-old self that's in law school, or actually you're still in college, but your 20-year-old self a letter, what would it say? For
me, the things that I always struggled with and I still work with are people pleasing and fear of abandonment. Those are my 2 character defects that have been kind of a consistent thread throughout my life. I would say a couple things. And look, this is going to sound like easy advice, but don't care about what other people think. Because that's all I did, is cared about what you thought. I went to law school because I thought people would want me to go to law school. I did all these things because I thought that's what the world expected of me, instead of being true to my authentic self. So I would just write myself a letter and say, it's okay to be you and not worry about what other people think. And I would also say to take chances. It's okay to fail, and you're going to fail. And actually failing is one of the greatest things that you can do. And just really do what the contrary action is, what your head is saying. So if your head's telling you to not do this one thing, maybe you should actually do the opposite. And that's been such an amazing advice for me, whether it be, public speaking, which used to be one of my biggest fears, and to actually now be able to speak in public. And look, I still get scared and I still get nervous, but to be able to walk through those fears just by doing what is considered contrary action has been one of the greatest pieces of advice that I got. And I would give that to myself for sure.
Great advice, especially the advice to deal with fear and just walk through it, because you just feel so much stronger when you get out on the other side.
I used to look at people who could speak in front of a crowd of 100 people to 500 people to 1,000 or whatever. And I would think that they were fearless. And I thought that these people were fearless. They had the answers and I didn't have it. And the fact of the matter is they might be scared too, but they actually took that fear and they walked through it. And for me, it's like, yeah, I'm going to be scared. There's going to be a lot of fear and I'm going to have these thoughts, but like nobody ever died from a thought. I never died from being scared, like that thought, but I can walk through it and I'll get to the other side and I'll be a better person for it.
Well, like I always think of Adele, who is just like the epitome of a professional singer, entertainer. And I was so blown away when she admitted that every time before she goes on stage, she feels like she's going to throw up.
Yeah.
And it just shows that, no matter where you are in your life, that fear is okay. And sometimes it's a driving force and it's okay. So, okay.
You real quick, like you might be scared to start a podcast, but you're starting a podcast and you're doing it, and that you're walking through your fears, and this is going to be an amazing journey. You're doing potentially what yourself told you that you shouldn't be doing. And that's so
thanks, Jim. Yes, you're correct. I am totally terrified by this, and yet it's exhilarating. And failure, I realize, is part of this process, but that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. I'm definitely scared about all this, and yet I'm doing it. Okay, so last question. What do you do to find happiness?
I have a pretty regimented morning routine of meditation. JC and I make coffee for the both of us. We sit down, we have a couple sips, and then we meditate together for about 10 minutes.
It's just amazing. I love that.
Yeah. It actually is an incredible way to start my day. That's one. That's the first thing I do. I do have a men's group outside of AA that I have like another meditation group that we actually hold each other accountable, and we talk about, our challenges, our fears, our struggles, and we create work statements around it. We hold each other accountable to it. And that's been a game changer for my happiness. Yes, I have my AA meeting. I try to be of service as much to other people as possible, because selfishly, by me being of service to somebody else, it gets me out of my head, and that makes me feel better. On a physical level, I definitely try to go surfing as much as I possibly can. Surfing is another form of my spiritual practice. When I'm in the ocean, all is right for me, and I love it. And it slows me down. It helps me focus. It helps me concentrate. It helps me with my relationships. It helps me in my business. I'm able to think clearly. That's definitely part of my happiness. Working out, exercising, breaking a sweat, trying to eat well, all the things, but those are the mains.
Well, I'm just so grateful that you're so healthy, both physically and mentally. And Adam, where can the listeners learn more about you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram at Adam_Jane Moto. You can look at our business. It's Jane Motorcycles. And those are probably the best way to find me.
Great. Well, I want to thank you so much. This was so comfortable for me, maybe because it's so familial, but you just really opened up your heart. And I know that anyone listening is going to appreciate that. And I love you, Adam.
I love you too. It's been fun, and I'm glad to have been able to sit down with you and do this. So keep doing it. And I look forward to seeing this thing blow up.
I want to thank Benjamin King for his heartfelt intro to Dear Family, as well as for helping me produce this podcast. And thank you to Ari Silberman, our audio engineer and composer. This is Rachel Steinman, and let's be close friends, like our families we choose. For more information, or to contact me with any questions or comments, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing Dear Family. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.